I am an African.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Africa for Dummies podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the unfortunate conflict going on in Sudan, and we have a very, very special guest who was gracious enough to join us on the podcast. I'm sure you guys are going to love this one. As always, please be sure to hit that notification bell. Leave us a rating on whichever podcast platform you're listening to this on, and as always, follow us on all social media platforms. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Please be aware that this is a two-part episode, two-part series, two-part episode. Yeah, so the first one is the one that you're about to see, and the second one is going to be uploaded at some point this week. As always, thank you so much for listening.
I am an African.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Africa for Dummies podcast. I know, again, we've been slacking a bit on pushing out these episodes, but just so you know, we try our best to go behind the scenes and try to get the best guests to speak on these issues so that we're better informed. As always, it's me, Nathan, and my co-host, partner in crime, Mr. Zenge.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be back here. We've been slacking quite a bit, but we're definitely going to get back on there, and we have an amazing guests. And I'll just leave the floor to Nathan to make the introduction.
Oh yeah, it's really great to be back. Every time I do this podcast thing, I always just like, oh man, this is really, really cool. Like, I don't know why we keep slacking, but anyways, yeah, unfortunately, we're back during some quite sad times. There's a conflict going on in Sudan, and there's a lot going on there, and if you're like me, a dummy, I don't know what exactly is going on, and to help us navigate through this, we have a great guest who is Nisirin Elamin. Hopefully I didn't butcher that. She is an assistant professor at the Department of Anthropology in the African Studies program at the University of Toronto. So thank you very much, Nisirin, for joining us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me and for also covering what's going on in Sudan. It's very important at the moment.
Yeah, very, very true. So just to dive right into it, as I said earlier, many of us don't know the conflicts that's going on in Sudan, the reason for it. So could you provide us with an overview of the current conflict and what are the main issues at play and who are the key players basically involved?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, in some ways, to understand what's happening today, we have to go a little bit back in history. But let me just do the contemporary sort of lead up to the outbreak of fighting between essentially two elements of a military coup regime in Sudan, the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese Armed Forces. So I'm going to take your listeners back to December of 2018. Popular revolution breaks out in Sudan. First outside of Khartoum before it comes to the capital city. And it's incredibly inspiring. I mean, basically millions of people participated in this, and it led to the overthrow of Omar Al Bashir, who's basically the leader of a very brutal 30-year military dictatorship in April of 2019. And it is around that time, I mean, right before, that about 1 million people gathered for a sit-in in front of the military headquarters in Khartoum, demanding not only his overthrow, that was the first demand, but really a full transition to civilian rule, a new constitution, and a couple of other demands holding the war criminals that sort of operated, that perpetrated, for example, the genocide in Darfur, and also were sort of part of the inner circle of this 30-year dictatorship to account and so forth. And so after al-Bashir was overthrown, people remained in front of the military headquarters because, again, this was not only about changing the head of this regime. And there was a kind of another coup that happened. In fact, there was one that only lasted for 24 hours, and then another one that was essentially the transitional military council taking over power. And that was composed of Bashir's inner circle, including Hemeti, who is currently the head of the Rapid Support Forces, so one faction in this fight, and General Al Burhan, who's the head of the Sudanese Armed Forces. So after that took place, there was then a kind of Well, first there was a massacre that happened in June of 2019 where the military regime essentially broke up the sit-in, killing over 120 people in one day. And after that, we had a series of kind of negotiations that led to the formation of a transitional government that was a partnership between the Transitional Military Council and essentially handpicked civilian elites. And during the process of that negotiation, the popular kind of democratic, if you will, anti-capitalist grassroots forces on the ground got sidelined. And this is a sort of grouping of neighborhood resistance committees that were really at the forefront of the revolution. These are groups that formed before the revolution, but really took on, kind of spearheaded the revolution, organizing protests, putting out sort of political statements and platforms. And what they were saying at the time was, we don't want to be negotiating, entering in partnership, or giving legitimacy to the leaders of the military coup regime. So we're not going to sit at the negotiation table. At some point this comes a little bit later. But so that's essentially what happened during that process, is they got sidelined. And so we had, and then I'm going to skip forward a little bit, but I don't think you need too much more detail. But essentially what then happened was that right before, in October of 2021, there was supposed to be a handover. So in this transitional government, the head of the Sovereignty Council was Al Burhan, the head of the Sudanese armed forces. And as we got closer to October, there was supposed to be both a transition to a civilian head of the Sovereignty Council. We had a civilian prime minister, Hamdok. But also there was kind of a process that was supposed to begin where there was supposed to be civilian oversight over the business interests of the military regime. So the military is...
Sorry, when you say business interest, you mean the economic, the economic drivers, like the resources and things like that? Like who allocates the resources and how the resources allocate?
Exactly. So essentially, the Sudanese military owns about 250 companies in Sudan.
Wow.
And they span everything from sort of gold, wheat, like basic food commodities, rubber, all the export kind of industries, right? And so, of course, and then we also have an overinflated budget where about 70% of the budget goes to the military. So you can imagine how powerful they are, right? And so there was supposed to be a move to basically have more civilian oversight to ultimately hand over these companies. And I should say that within the two factions that we'll get to in a minute, you had Al Burhan on the one hand, head of the Sudanese armed forces. They own more of the kind of companies in food commodities, etc. And then you had on the other hand, you have Hamidti, the head of the Rapid Support Forces, who owns most of the companies affiliated with gold in Sudan. So that'll become in a minute. So this is not really a battle for political control, but also economic control. But go ahead, Nzengi, please.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to hold my tongue now because there's so many things that just I hear and I latch onto, and there's so many signs that I can see even in like other countries, and like the patterns that they've gone into, where the military is so entrenched with the economy, and it's sort of like Sudan seems to be wedded to the military like by force. I think you said there was, the coup that initially was there. And I think it's actually very good that you mentioned that Omar Al Bashir was not the only target for the protest, because often the frustration is that, with the Arab Spring, I think Sudan was probably like the last of the Arab Spring, or maybe it's not in that category. But the notion is that when you remove the leader, things will get better and so on and so forth. But it seems they... and this is where we're going to sort of the historical factors of the current conflict. It seems there's that sort of architecture of authoritarianism or dictatorship as the way you sort of divide and rule type of. And that's what I'm getting when you see the news and it's sort of like two generals fighting.
Yes.
And those generals were both under, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they were both under Omar Al Bashir, right? Or was it something that just came up. I don't know if you can speak to that, about the whole rivalry and the historical factor and sort of the whole assumption that, removing one individual leader might be a solution, but then again, you end up with lasting problems.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So let me just finish the part where we get to today, and then I'll get back to this because I want to kind of finish the timeline. So essentially, after the October 25th, 2021 coup, there was another protracted process of negotiations that happened. And that was led by, the international community under UNITAMS, and there were new kind of civilian actors that had been subsumed into the civilian faction. These are some of the armed rebel groups that signed the Juba Agreement in 2020, a peace agreement that was supposed to lead to kind of lasting peace. It was part of the demands of the revolution. And so we saw increasingly also the civilian faction being less representative of the popular elements of the revolution, and continuing the balance of power continued to be tipped in favor of the military regime leaders, right? Hemeti and Al Burhan. So, and essentially after the coup, it was Al Burhan was the head and Hemeti was his deputy. So they were basically ruling together, right? But there were already tensions between them. And so in some ways we saw some of this coming. I mean, certainly not its manifestation into what we see today, but people were certainly not surprised that there were tensions. I mean, that these kind of tensions brewed up. And so then in December 2022, an agreement was kind of formulated and signed, the first phase of it, that was supposed to lead to another kind of handover or creation of a transitional government, a partnership between, again, the military coup regime and civilian actors that would, in a couple of years, lead us to democratic elections. And right before that deadline, so the second phase of this was supposed to be kind of in April, right before that deadline is when this fighting broke out. And part of it had to do with the fact that under the agreement, the Rapid Support Forces, which are known as the Janjaweed, and that name might be familiar to people from the genocide in Darfur, which started in 2003, that was essentially I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but it was there were tensions between Arab-identified kind of nomadic groups vying for land and water resources and kind of indigenous African groups that are mostly sedentary farming communities. And those tensions existed before, but were exacerbated, of course, by government neglect and desertification and so forth. And in the past, a lot of these conflicts had been resolved through a third party. I mean, there were still external actors. There's like weapons coming in from Chad and Libya, but they hadn't ever escalated to the point that we then saw during the genocide. And so in 2003, instead of the Sudanese government coming in and trying to de-escalate that, they armed the Arab militia, the Arab-identified militia, against these sedentary communities, and who then perpetrated a genocide, essentially. Burning down villages, displacing, millions of people who continue to live in internally displacement, the IDP camps inside Sudan, but also in Chad, refugee camps there, who have not been able to return to their land. And we saw also mining interests entering, including Western mining interests into the areas of Darfur that have gold. And that's kind of how Hemeti also gained fame, right, is by taking control of that trade. And so the Janjaweed under Al Bashir were then legitimized as a paramilitary force called the Rapid Support Forces. He kind of renamed them. And I should also add that in 2014, there was something called the Khartoum Process, under which the European Union essentially armed and funded the RSF to become their border control at their externalized border between Sudan and Libya. And so they then further legitimized them. So basically the political agreement that was supposed to come in, be signed in April, what it was supposed to do is they were supposed to integrate the Rapid Support Forces into the Sudanese armed forces. And Al Burhan, head of the SAF, I'm just going to use their acronyms now. So RSF is Rapid Support Forces under Hemeti. SAF is Sunnis Armed Forces under Al Burhan. So basically, Al Burhan wanted that process to take 2 years, and Hemeti said, he wants that to take 10 years at least. And that was one of the sources of tension, but it can't be reduced to that. Really what this is about is political and economic control over the country. And these two war criminals, essentially, whose crimes span decades, not only in Darfur, but also South Sudan, the Nuba Mountains, are vying for power here. And that's what happened on April 15th. I was there. We woke up to gunfire and we found out that essentially they'd, decided to fight to, it seems, the bitter end. And we were all caught up in the middle. And, Khartoum is a mega city of almost 7 million people, very densely populated. So you can imagine they're using civilian shields, etc. So that'll bring us up to today. And then you had another question, sorry, that I did not. You wanted me to go back, I think, historically a little bit, or?
Yeah. The question basically was, I think you somewhat covered it already. What type of lessons and what type of understanding can we get from? So the term coup-proofing would be, I guess, a way to call the setup of the RSF and the SAF, the Sudanese army. Normally, people and protesters are accused of wanting to overthrow one man, and often you end up with the problems that one might point at Sudan for, one might point at Libya for. What sort of lessons are they in the way Omar Al Bashir, because I don't see many people sort of investigating the exact structure of sort of Omar Al Bashir's authoritarian power sort of structure. And I see many of these sort of longtime leaders, particularly at the end of the Cold War, people like Mobutu, the whole country just collapses after they leave. In Somalia, that was the case with a guy called Ziad Barre. What is it that these leaders provide that when they leave? And, I think I heard that Omar Al Bashir has been released just a few weeks ago. And so what is it? Yeah. So what is it that they have that once they leave, the country implodes, and what type of lessons can we learn from it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if I can fully answer it, but I'm an academic, so I'll, say partly, history, in the sense that, Britain's parting gift to Sudan, we gained our independence in 1956, was an export-oriented extractive economy, and a political structure that really put sort of central northern Sudanese elites in power. The south of Sudan, which was governed as a separate entity during colonialism, was essentially subsumed under Sudan as an internal, quasi-colony. And that, of course, led to a rebellion, naturally, that started in 1955, even before our independence. And that was the first phase of the Sudanese civil war, the second being from 1983 to 2005. Over 2 million South Sudanese died in that war. And I connect this here because it's quite similar to Darfur in that that war was about quelling dissent, right, and demands for political representation and kind of equitable access to the country's resources, and the sort of continuation of an extractive war economy that benefited these elites at the center of Sudan, right? And so we see a kind of political and economic structure, what people might call the deep state, that serves a handful of elites at the center of the country at the expense of pretty much everybody else, particularly in the peripheries of Sudan, where they're, primarily sort of indigenous Africans live. And that means that when you cut off the head, you have people underneath who are then vying for the top, if you will, and for kind of different parts of the pie. And I think, again, I'm not a political analyst, so I don't know if there are probably people who can answer this better than me. But I do think that Al-Bashir kind of held something very fragile together for a long time. He was a strategic man. And I think once that kind of he left, there was a kind of vacuum that now the people in his inner circle have been vying for, essentially, in terms of power. And that's what we're seeing, I think, at the moment, yeah.
Okay. So just to kind of summarize what we've been kind of going through, if you're going to explain this to a 5-year-old kid, you have essentially two military generals. One is Hamiti and the other is sorry, I forgot the name. Al Burhan. And they're basically the reason for I guess they're basically just trying to take power, consolidate power amongst each other. Okay, so I guess the question now is, I mean, we've kind of understood where the conflict is stemming from, but I think we've been reading on the news how badly people in Sudan have been affected. So we could just to kind of get how the people in Sudan have been affected, and even if you have some personal experiences, just to let us know, like, what are the humanitarian consequences of this conflict?
Yeah, no, that's another great question. So, I mean, when the fighting first started, I was in Khartoum. I was sheltering in place with my 3-year-old daughter, my elderly parents. And, it was mostly a sonic experience. We were just hearing missiles and gunfire and, explosions go off around us. And in the first days of fighting, actually, my mother's cousin was killed by a stray bomb in her home. So there were people getting killed even in sheltering in place in their homes. We eventually, after a couple of days, evacuated to a village about an hour south of Khartoum, where my father is from. But even in that short period, the electricity was cut, the water was cut. We had started running out of food. I remember there was a ceasefire one day, and the ceasefires it's really a misnomer. You could still hear gunfire during them. But they, it was like usually around iftar time, because this was during Ramadan. People were fasting. We were all fasting. A ceasefire was announced, and my daughter was hungry. We didn't have any milk or fresh eggs or anything left. And so I went outside and was sprinting from like a neighborhood store to neighborhood store as I was hearing gunshots. The stores had all run out, and this was just in the first couple of days of fresh food. I found a line for bread. By the time I got to the front, the bread was all gone. A couple hours later, we were able to find some bread and we distributed among neighbors. But that was the situation in the first couple of days. And in that same neighborhood, some of my relatives still remain. The electricity is still cut, the water is still cut, and we are 4 weeks in. So you can only imagine, right? I mean, we've been on Twitter trying to coordinate urgent medicines for relatives and loved ones. People have died in their own homes, either from artillery or just having, lost, access to healthcare, because also the hospitals have been hit. The majority of them are not working anymore. The only people providing humanitarian assistance at the moment are these radical resistance committees, the neighborhood resistance committees I mentioned earlier, who are distributing food, water, identifying safe routes for people to get out or to get to the hospital, converting, houses into clinic and so forth, at great risk to themselves, because, them moving around means that they can get shot easily. At the moment, the latest numbers, which are underreported, is that 700 people have been killed, 5,000 injured, 700,000 have been internally displaced, many going up to the border with Egypt, where essentially the Egyptian border is closed. I mean, they're letting some people in, but it's a very, very slow process. And there's another kind of humanitarian crisis at that border, because there's no humanitarian assistance. So we heard of somebody who passed away of heat exhaustion at the border because there's no presence of there's no water distributed, etc. So that's the humanitarian situation. I mean, it's devastating. I should also mention this is not only happening in Khartoum. In fact, in some ways, the violence has escalated in various cities in Darfur. Jenaina, in particular, in West Darfur, has been particularly hard hit. We just heard these Jeddah talks happened in Saudi Arabia that really didn't.
And Darfur is on the western part, southwestern part of Sudan.
Exactly. It neighbors Chad. And I should mention Sudan neighbors 7 countries. We actually until recently had 1.1 million refugees being hosted in Sudan, the majority from South Sudan, but also Ethiopia, Eritrea, Yemen, Syria. We have, one of the largest refugee populations in Africa. And because we border so many countries, instability and war in Sudan is definitely going to affect the region. And so, yeah, it's a disaster. I mean, really. And the talks in Jeddah were a sham. They didn't produce.
Yeah, as you said, actually, I just saw the World Health Organization said the death toll was like 600 and something. As you said, it's just increasing, and it's probably underreported. And when we see the scenes and all of the personal accounts of what's going on in Sudan, is because Sudan might not have been the most political, democratic, and so on, but there was a relative stability for a very long while, and so it's quite shocking to see the scenes that people are in, and also the contrast of how it looked before and how it's looking now. And I think that can only leave a scar on sort of the conscience of people and the psyche. And I think I saw that one of the kid that sort of said, and the BBC got the interview of the kid, and he said that I feel like a traitor for leaving Sudan, and all of it sort of seems like the people are stuck in the middle. Yes. And I had a question as to sort of how this is being fueled, and it seems like there's no one on top of the two generals, and it's mostly, I don't know whether these are alleged or they are true, the level of international backing, either militarily or economically, for the both Hemedti and Al Bashir. And can you just give us a little wrap on what type of international backing these individuals have? Because we've seen the situation in Libya, the post-Gaddafi Libya, and how you have General Haftar from Benghazi, and we have the transitional government that's got its own set of international backers. So what's the international role? And we understand there's the Arab League, there's also, and in that international role, do you think the African Union can have a space? So what type of international backers do the generals have, and is there any space for the African Union, or has the African Union failed?
Yeah, great question. So I don't know if I mentioned this already, but basically there are credible reports that the RSF is being supported through Libya by General Haftar, and that he in turn is getting support from the UAE and from Russia, from the Wagner group in particular. And on the other side, you have the Sudanese armed forces. The top people in the SAF have strong connections to Sisi in Egypt, and so they're getting support through Egypt. And I, whenever I talk in the media, I say, really what we need in the future is hands-off Sudan, less international intervention, because what we see is that there is already too much international intervention that has been damaging. Until until we freeze their assets and stop fueling them with arms and money and so forth, the fighting will continue most likely, because they don't have the best interest of the people at heart here. So that's one point. You asked about the African Union. There was an IGAD process that was sort of African Union process that...
Sorry. So for our listeners, IGAD is the International Great Lakes... it's an international governmental organization that normally deals with the Horn of Africa and Northeast Africa.
Yeah. Exactly. And so, there was basically the president of South Sudan, Salva Kiir, was starting to kind of initiate talks. They weren't necessarily going anywhere, but then they got derailed by this US-Saudi effort in Jeddah. And so for me, I would much rather, even though the AU has not necessarily always played a positive role, especially at some point, the Egyptians were at the head of it, and, they would issue statements, but not much action behind it. I think in general, it's kind of like too little too late with the African Union often. But I think we need to build their capacity to be much more effective. And that's only going to happen if we entrust them with these kinds of processes. And so I think I would much rather have this be brokered on the continent by multilateral agencies that are African grown, if you will, because there's much more at stake for them, right? If you think about the Gulf states, I mean, I study investments, Saudi and Emirati investments. They've invested about $27 billion in Sudan in real estate, infrastructure, land. That's kind of what I do my research on. They're trying to protect their investments here. You know, these deals have been done with elites in power. And so whereas, you know, for South Sudan, instability, I mean, most of the oil after South Sudan seceded in 2011, 75% of the oil resources remained in South Sudan, but the pipeline goes through Sudan and out through Port Sudan. So this is going to have a major impact on the South Sudanese economy, you know, and so that's why I think, you know, African actors need to be there, because there's going to be much more at stake for them than for certainly the US and Saudi Arabia, you know.
I am an African.